welcoming you to a life of awareness. The Presence Project is excited for you to join us for today's podcast with your host, Paul Kerzner.
Hello and welcome to episode 64 of Are You Being Present? My name is Paul Kerzner. I want to welcome you to the present moment. I want to welcome you to the here and now. And I want to thank you wholeheartedly, sincerely, and deeply for joining me in this amazing, truly amazing present moment. The title and topic of this podcast is Seeking Neutrality in the Present Moment. And I decided that the topic of neutrality was important, it was topical, and it's relevant to everyone's reality in some way, shape, or form. I know that I often speak of neutrality when working with patients. Neutrality is something that I think about often because it allows for presence. And we've approached presence in a variety of different ways, in a variety of different facets and manners. Seeking neutrality is a logical step for us right now. And I want to present it because I believe that the pursuit of neutrality can be a very helpful tool that you can include in your presence toolbox and use it as you go throughout your day. Because in my opinion, neutrality is the path. It is the middle ground that we should be seeking so that we are not constantly being pulled out of the present moment, whether that's to the future or to the past. Neutrality allows for clarity and ultimately leads to presence. So why neutrality? What's the value in seeking neutrality? Well, when we seek neutrality, the analogy I like to provide is like a pendulum. The pendulum for a clock swings back and forth. The midpoint, the point at which the pendulum swings in the middle, is a neutral point. And if you want to think about the two opposite sides of the pendulum swinging, one side could be positive and the other side could be negative. And oftentimes as we go throughout our days, our pendulum is constantly swinging back and forth, back and forth. And it depends on how many different triggers you might be encountering. It depends on what your ego is trying to make you believe. There's so many different variables. But the midpoint is where peace exists. And I know that, as we go throughout our days, we want to remain hopeful. We want to remain positive. We don't want to feel negative. But the problem with the pursuit of positivity or trying to get away from negativity is that oftentimes we suffer because if we believe that we just want a positive life, we want to feel good, we want to feel great, everything is awesome. I think that's really nice. And when you enter into a moment, if that appears, definitely accept it and be happy with it. But the problem that exists, in my humble opinion, is that when we try to hold on to the more positive facets of our reality, we tend to suffer. And it's oftentimes self-inflicted suffering because nothing lasts. And I've talked about that in the past, about the impermanence of this reality. Everything is constantly changing. The beauty of presence is that it's the reminder that nothing lasts. And we can get into more of an accepting state of mind because of that. The issue with negativity or trying not to be negative or pushing against it or resisting it or whatever it is that it ultimately creates more of that because that's where our attention is. And that's, something that I could definitely delve into in a future podcast. But, just speaking topically, when we say we don't want something and it's constantly on our mind, we end up getting more of it. And that creates more self-inflicted suffering. Again, one of the things I've talked about in the past has been perceptions. So positive and negative are merely perceptions of our reality. And it's a construct, there's no doubt, and it makes sense logically. But holding on to one or pushing against the other doesn't allow for presence at all. And that's where neutrality comes in. And really, I can think of no better time for us to really focus on being neutral, on pursuing neutrality is in this present moment. There is just so much going on right now in the world, and it becomes so easy to become emotional, become swayed, to get pulled out of the moment. Things are what they are, and it's when we allow our ego, or we use identifiers, descriptors for people, places, and things, that we lose the present moment. We lose the ability to have clarity and see things for what they really are. We're just seeing things for the way that we want them to be. And that is definitely a presence obstruction. So that brings us back to neutrality. I believe that the topic of neutrality is certainly one that isn't discussed often, but I can think of no better cause right now or throughout our lives than the constant pursuit, the constant seeking, the constant value of neutrality, being neutral, peeling away the perceptions, the labels, the words, because ultimately that's going to allow you to stay in that flow state, because everything has a beginning, middle, and end to it. And being neutral allows you to stay in that flow state. Being neutral allows you to be present. Being neutral provides you the clarity that you're really seeking so that you could stay grounded in the moment. Now, I totally understand why people pursue good feeling things and why we resist bad feeling things. I mean, it makes sense. But being detached is the goal. Detachment is the key. And being detached from the things that are happening to you and ultimately for you can be alleviated by using neutrality. I understand that a topic like this can be a little adverse and challenging to wrap one's head around. And it's certainly something that I have been challenged with in my life. I'm not absolved. Just because I talk about presence a lot and I use mindfulness techniques and tools doesn't mean that I'm not challenged. I'm challenged often. So I understand personally, professionally, clinically, the value of seeking neutrality in every instance of my reality, in every instance of my daily waking life, because my choice is not to incur self-inflicted suffering. And I know that if I remain neutral, it doesn't give my ego the fuel that it wants to take me out of the moment, to make me suffer needlessly. So the seeking of neutrality, the pursuit of neutrality, is a tool that you can use to relieve and alleviate the self-inflicted suffering that's taking place in your reality. Now in the world, there's a lot of suffering taking place, and on top of that, there's self-inflicted suffering taking place. The suffering that we experience in our lives oftentimes is woven into our reality for good cause. It's to teach us, to help us shift. It's a lesson to be observed. Then there's the self-inflicted suffering that takes place, and that's all in your head. And your ego loves that. And because it's a form of control. But when you're truly present and you're really doing your best to be neutral to the things that are being provided to you, regardless of how you feel about it, you will see that it will become a lot easier to be present, to stay present, and to really see things for what they truly are. Not to be disillusioned based on your perceptions, based on your emotions, based on your ego mind. And ultimately, that's where I'm trying to lead you towards. Less self-inflicted suffering. And neutrality is a key. Make no mistake. So a good question to ask yourself as you go throughout your day, as things are challenging or even triggering to you, is, how can I be more neutral in regards to whatever is showing up in front of my face? Or, in the adverse, you can ask yourself, how am I not being neutral to the things that are showing up for me? How can I implement neutrality to alleviate the self-inflicted suffering? These are helpful questions to ask yourself. The dialogue that you should be having with yourself, not to be listening to that ego mind and taking it for fact, because that's not a good path to walk down. And the point of this podcast is to provide you with the tools so that you can handle your ego differently, So it doesn't have to be in control of you. And it's so tricky because the ego knows how to manipulate you very easily. It knows you better than you know yourself. But this podcast isn't about the ego. This podcast is to present you with neutrality. And I truly believe that neutrality is going to be a fundamental key in getting us through each and every present moment, allowing you to ground in, to root into the moment by seeing things clearly, by allowing you to stay in a flow state, by calming your mind, by observing your thoughts. I'm not sure I need to go any deeper into neutrality, but my hope is that talking about a topic like this will present you with, some different tools, a different way of seeing your reality, something to kind of think about, to pontificate on, and then ultimately to use as you're going through these moments, as you're being challenged on multiple levels. That's what this topic, that's what this podcast is for. So it is my hope that you can remain neutral, that you can see the value of neutrality, and that it can help provide solace as you enter and greet each and every present moment.
Thank you for listening to the Are You Being Present podcast, brought to you by the Presence Projects. Remember, you have a choice. Choose to be present.